You're listening to Death of the Reader. Flex and Herds here for your Murder Mystery World Tour, and we are back with our second week covering Alex Pavesi's 8 Detectives. Herds is in the hot seat.
Flex.
We are going from chapters 6 to 13 today, which means that you have now read all 7 to completion of Grant McAllister's mysterious white murders.
Which means that I know exactly what's going on, and it's very clear, and I have no questions about timelines or time travel for that matter, anything crazy like that. I'm very excited to get into the meta-narrative for this one because Alex Pavesi has left us quite the breadcrumb trail.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting the way that we have these stories set out. As we were talking about last week on the show, they sort of are getting more complicated the further that we get in. And you can kind of see that from the cast list alone. I won't sit here and list characters to you, but our collection of suspects just keeps getting longer and longer.
Until we get to the shadow in the staircase, of course.
Yes, where suspiciously we have very, very few characters altogether.
And no suspects at all, really.
But the other thing that's really interesting about this section is that we are much more clearly getting into direct criticism of specific murder mystery texts.
Yeah, I mean, the most obvious one is Trouble on Pearl Island, which is pretty clearly an homage, almost a ripoff of And Then There Were None. Even the characters, you know, there's a doctor who is clearly a stand-in for the judge of the original text. There's the servants who die together on the beach. Like, there's all these characters. There's the old religious lady and the young, like, bird in a cage character. The only thing we're missing is the rhyme, but all the characters in the story seem to have been pulled from And Then There Were None. But the way that we kind of look at it is more focused on the aftermath. We don't watch these characters go through the motions of their demise. We come in after the facts and kind of explore the island after the carnage has already occurred, and the characters try to kind of piece it together.
The other stories critiquing murder mystery being clear aren't necessarily in ways that are a direct pastiche of the texts that they're critiquing.
Sure.
I would have to very abruptly spoil some other books to tell you exactly what criticism is going on, but if you've read them, you will recognize them quite clearly. And Then There Were None is definitely the one that sticks out as being like, okay, I don't need to bury this one away behind spoiler warnings.
I mean, and Inferno in Theaterland, I don't know that I enjoyed this story as much as the others, but I did really find the ending to be very interesting because we set up this complicated thing with, you know, all these are the murder weapons, these are the ways in which the person could have been killed, and there's a fire going on. Yeah, there's all these different threads, but at the end, a guy just walks into the room, says, "Hey guys, I'm here for the party." And the detective is like, "Oh, you did it. You all did it. I figured it out because of this one crazy party guy who shows up out of nowhere." Like, it feels very contrived, which of course it does. But
it's interesting that you say that because that wasn't the part of the ending that stood out to me the most when I went through. The part is actually the aftermath after she said her solution and she kind of wanders off and it ends on this really strange closing line of her being like cleansed by the flames.
Sure.
But to me, that reads as her like walking into the fire.
Yeah, well, it feels like a resolution when there wasn't really a resolution at all. The characters just kind of leave, right?
It's such a strange line to end on when the text clearly doesn't support the direct interpretation of the line.
No, I agree that it's a sort of the juxtaposition there of literally what happens in the story. You know, the resolution of the crime, which is very unsatisfactory. And then this powerful emotional moment at the end where Helen seems to have gone on a journey that we weren't really privy to.
Yeah, it's super strange. And there's something that sort of is happening with a bunch of these stories the further we go in, where their conclusions are all starting to feel much more open about these sorts of discrepancies we were talking about. Like the length of the guy's neck, for example, in The Detective and His Evidence was a very obvious clue that got forked in the ending of the story. But as we get into like Trouble on Blue Pearl Island and there's like a mechanical trap that like chops one of the investigators' necks off.
Yeah, well, I mean,
like he gets decapitated.
It's a very hurried ending, isn't it? It doesn't really seem to fit.
It really doesn't.
All these stories have these strange discrepancies, but it's, as you say, it becomes more blatant that there's some laziness going on, particularly when we look at her, the inconsistencies in Inferno and Theaterland. She points out that there are lots of things that are black when they clearly are meant to be white. And it doesn't seem so strange if you look at the cat and the white suit being changed to a black suit. Those make sense as like intentional discrepancies to some degree. But black wine doesn't make any sense. It's almost as though someone has just searched that story for the word white and hit replace all with the word black without regard for the consequences of that change.
The use of the word laziness surprised me there because the discrepancies that we've had in the other stories are perhaps more explicable than the replace all-ish nature of the word white from black. But
yeah,
as far as I can tell, the story is set pre-computers. So it still would have had to have been done by hand. It's still a deliberate choice, still a task that was undertaken.
Yeah, I don't know. I guess maybe it was done in a fit of emotional passion. I don't know. I'm not sure. I'm not sure exactly.
It should, I guess, to me, say something about the character of Grant and why he wrote it that way. It's also interesting because when we look at Julia, in the first couple of stories, she was referring to the discrepancies as like a fault. She is someone who's working with a publisher. It's like, I'm slightly alarmed that there is a quality error in this text that I'm considering publishing. But now that she's seen a few more of them, she's still curious about their connection to the murder of Elizabeth White, but she's a bit more along for the ride in terms of being like, oh, okay, it's a cool oddity. I understand that this is like done with intention, but there is still a very strange aura to the way that they discuss it. I don't know if that was coming through to you.
Well, I think there's definitely some back and forth going on here. Julia is definitely, I think that she's more aware of Grant's mindset and Grant's intention. I get the sense that she's an intellectual equal, if not surpassing the Grant that she's speaking with. I feel like she's trying to figure him out in the same way that he's trying to figure her out, you know? There's sort of a mind game going on there around the content of the novel and where it came from.
Well, yeah, because it's also like so many of these stories, particularly like Trouble on Blue Pearl Island, we were comparing it to And Then There Were None, and the novel definitely is as well. But Trouble in Blue Pearl Island is so framed in like mechanized horror tropes that it felt so weird and intentionally out of place.
I suppose so. I feel like it's experimental, right? It's taking a different spin on the traditional murder mystery. Like I think it's the most explicitly about a specific case, a specific golden age mystery.
Yeah.
And so the intent of the original author was to try to tackle it from a different angle and create something unique there.
Okay, well then, what about The Shadow on the Staircase, the literal ghost story?
Well, let me tell you. The secret as to why that book is not actually finished and why a lot of these endings don't seem to be quite the original of what they used to be is that the Grant that wrote these novels, Flex, is dead. That is the big conspiracy.
So who's the Grant we're speaking to then?
That would be Francis Gardner, my dear Watson.
Francis, that was the name on the
the cigarette case.
The cigarette case,
which
yes.
When questioned, the Grant that we're speaking with looks very panicked and says, yes, I used to smoke, but not anymore. And obviously in that moment is not thinking about the fact that case is not addressed to Grant McAllister, but is in fact addressed to Francis Gardner, the student of Grant McAllister, who has taken up the work of his former mentor.
Oh, goodness.
After his death.
This is getting more and more complex as we go.
I know. And I'll be honest, I don't even know that I've figured everything out.
Okay.
I feel like I'm about halfway to the truth.
Well, tell you what, Herds,
see.
we should take a pause, come back with your theories in just a second. And I need to know what you have figured out.
Everything. Not that much. Not that much, let's be honest.
Alrighty. Well, this is your Murder Mystery World Tour here on 2SER 107.3. Flex and Herds here discussing Alex Pavesi's 8 Detectives, also known as the 8th Detective in some parts of the world. We'll be back with Herds theories in just a second. Stick around on your Murder Mystery World Tour. You're listening to Death of the Reader, Flex here, and today we are joined on the show for a special interview by 2SER's own Irene Diakanastasis, talking with author Kelli Hawkins about her latest psych thriller, Apartment 303. Laden with plenty of mystery twisties, Apartment 303 follows a PI living apart from the world, but I will let Irene take it from here.
Today, I'm joined by the wonderful Kelli Hawkins, who is here to talk about her new novel, Apartment 303, releasing on March 8th. Kelli, thank you for joining us.
Hi, Irene. Thanks for having me.
For listeners looking for a new read, how would you describe Apartment 303?
I guess I call it a domestic thriller in that it's a domestic suspense. It's an Australian novel, so it's set in Sydney, and it's about a woman in her 20s, Rory, who has some mental health issues. She's had trauma in her past, and she doesn't go out of her apartment very often. She watches through her window. It's about what happens one day from her room. She doesn't witness a murder, but she sees there's a man murdered across the road from her, a homeless man. So she doesn't see this, but she sees the police arrived, and she's sort of drawn into the outside world when she hasn't really had to do that for a very long time. She's been inside for a number of years. So it's basically about what happens to her and whether her past is going to come back to get her, I suppose.
Very, very mysterious from that description alone. Now, before we get into Rory, I think we should talk a bit about you. So now, what was your motivational inspiration to write this particular story?
Yeah, there's a couple of things with this story, actually. The first thing, I suppose, that started this whole story off was this event of the homeless man being murdered. Was actually something that happened in my life like 25 years ago.
Oh, wow.
I actually lived in the building that I've put in the novel is not, it's fictional, but it's essentially in the same place as where I lived with my then boyfriend who became my partner, my husband. And that did happen. A man was murdered across the road.
Oh, my.
Yeah, so it stemmed from that, and it's not, I mean, I wasn't as involved in it, obviously, as what I've fictionalised, but it was still something that obviously stuck with me even all these years later. Yeah, and there was one particular man that is kind of the equivalent to Long Socks in the book. So it kind of stemmed from that, and then I suppose the second part of the story was Rory with her, what has happened to her in the past and why she might be watching and what might happen. So I was interested in the issues that she had.
Rory is this very complex character, and not only does the choice of using a first-person narrator really bring us into her stream of consciousness, but I feel like readers almost develop a sense of companionship with her as they try and work out the truth of the plot. So
yeah.
Despite being a fierce character, would you say at times that she comes across as a bit of an unreliable narrator?
Yes, I would. I do have a bit of I do quite like the old unreliable narrator. I think you've got to be a little bit cautious with it, especially there's a lot of Rory in this book. There's a lot of focus on her. And yes, I think the part of that was trying to bring in a little bit of the claustrophobia and a little bit of, that we understand kind of what she's going through, that we can really relate to her. It was deliberate, to do that, but she's definitely, there's some aspects of her that are unreliable. And I think at first particularly perhaps we're not sure how this is going to pan out. And I don't want to give too much away about the plot, but she definitely could go either way. And but I think there's also, like you said, a little bit of compassion and understanding of what she's like as well. So it kind of flips around a little bit.
During the day, Rory works for her aunt's private investigation business. Now, given your background, I understand that you write reports for private investigators for a living.
I do. So I do write reports. They're not as, it's not as thrilling as it sounds. It's interesting, but so I write reports. They'll have surveillance operatives that it's mostly for workers' compensation and insurance kind of claims. And then I will write up a report that the surveillance private investigator gives me that then would go to the client. I think part of being a writer is just an interest in other people. It's that thing of, you imagine what they might be doing or other things about them. Yeah, so I do. So I gave her that job because it kind of also ties in with her being a watcher, that she can do that from her house, and she can feel like she's somewhat involved in the world by writing these reports where she watches other people, even though she's still alone most of the time.
Not to give too much of the story away, but as Rory slowly starts to try and conquer her fears, she starts to make some friends along the way. Now, what characters or any character dynamics between Rory and other characters in the novel did you particularly enjoy writing? Or
Yeah, well, that would definitely be Rory and Farah, because I think having her become friends with someone younger than her seemed natural to me, because in some ways, because she's been on her own for so long, she's got a young way about her, like a naivety, I suppose, that would relate, I think, to a younger person. It's kind of like she's stopped changing when she got to 17 or 18. So she'd be friends, I think, with someone younger. So for me, their relationship is interesting. But there was also that element that I had to make sure Rory knew she was the adult. So that relationship was important. And I suppose the relationship she had, there was a couple really, because she has a nice relationship with Ron, who lives downstairs. Doesn't live downstairs. He's the main security guard. So she's had a lot to do with him over the years. And he's a bit of an older, wiser man that she feels she's worried that it's another concern for her, is that he's going to retire and she'll be left with one less friend, I suppose. So she has that concern in the back of her mind. And their relationship, I think, even though it's not extremely close, I think over a number of years you grow to have quite strong relationships with people that have that sort of a role in your life that you might see every day. That one was important. And then there's the relationship she has with Simon, which is a man who moved into her building. And there's a little bit of a romance there, but not an excessive one, because she's still quite nervous about or anything to do with that, a romance or just becoming close to anybody. So for her to start trusting him, I think, was important, and I was trying to make him the sort of person that you could see that she would trust, because she's going to be particularly nervous, and he'd have to be pretty special, I think, to draw her out and become more than friends with her. So yeah, there's a few relationships, and that was challenging because it was all taking place in the one apartment. So she needs people to interact with. So I had to work out ways to bring them to her and to, move the plot forward. It's a challenging thing.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. Now, you've touched on it a bit before, but mental health and exploration of the human psyche is a consistent theme within this novel. Mm-hmm. Now, the mental and emotional focus on Rory's character arc definitely drives a lot of this, but how would you say Rory's character evolves throughout the novel? Or would you say it goes through this process of evolving or self-actualization?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, she starts off, obviously, there's a lot of fear in her, but she's also quite capable. She's comfortable, I suppose, in a way, in her apartment, but there's also this desire to get out, and she knows she's missing out on life. So I think the things that happen to her in the book and meeting the new people and the world coming in that she can't help, all those things kind of help her to become more trusting of other people. Obviously, things are happening to her that aren't good, so she should in some ways become less trusting. But I think she learns that she can have other people help her, and she finds friends that might, stand by her. So I think she moves forward, and I think it's more to do with the ability to escape. So yeah, I think there's a lot of growth that she goes through in the course of the novel.
Do you see this kind of empowerment within her character?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. She's always been self-sufficient, but not in the way, that will help her leave.
Apartment 303 is released on March 8th, and a massive thank you to Kelli for doing this interview.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you to Irene Diakanastasis for that interview with Kelli Hawkins on Apartment 303. If you want to find out more about the book, we will have links up on the podcast, and there is an even longer version of that interview up on the 2SER website at 2ser.com. Thank you to HarperCollins Publishers Australia for getting Irene a copy of that book. We'll be back with more of 8 Detectives in just a second. Stick around on your Murder Mystery World Tour. You're listening to Death of the Reader. Flex and Herds here for your Murder Mystery World Tour, discussing Alex Pavesi's 8 Detectives, chapters 6 to 13. Herds. You just told me that a man is dead in a murder mystery, and I quite frankly can't believe you.
I know. I can't believe that there is death in my murder mystery, in my detective fiction. How dare there be a detective and a murder?
Fred McNamara, or whatever his name is,
What?
kill Grant McAllister?
Fred? Who is Fred?
I don't know. What was the guy's name? It was just the name off a cigarette case, Herds.
What? Francis Gardner.
Francis Gardner.
So here's the thing. This whole story is about...
Did he kill him in a garden shed?
I hope so. But maybe. This whole story is about like simplifying things and whittling them down to the bare nub. But anyway, I went over the tomes and I realized that there was some strangeness to the way that Grant was speaking, because he seems very confident in speaking about the mathematics and the theory. But when it comes to actually speaking about the stories, he seems to have no clue what he's on about.
Yeah, he's like almost kind of making up the theories alongside the stories that he's just heard. Like,
maybe
he doesn't know which one relates to each story. He's hearing the story and going, "Oh, that's just like this."
Yeah. Well, the thing is that there is a change in tone of Grant as he switches between the different time breaks. I think that this is to do with the questions that Julia is asking, because she has to know that the Grant that she is speaking with is not the real Grant. There's lots of allusions to like relationships breaking down and the way that we talk about how incompetent detectives are. I think that these stories were written by the original Grant McAllister.
Okay.
Inspired by the white murder of Elizabeth What's-Her-Face.
Elizabeth White.
That's the one. Thank you. I knew there was something there. Anyway, Elizabeth White, the white murder. I think that it was inspired by her death, but that before he could publish the stories, he died of his own circumstances.
Do you think that those own circumstances have appeared in the text before us?
Yes. I'm struggling to... That's the timeline. I hate time puzzles.
Because the curious question is if his death, if the original Grant McAllister's death appears in the text that we have read, it would mean that Francis Gardner had gone through and edited that in. So why does Francis not know the text, if you're saying that?
I think that he has read the stories and, you know, he wants to publish them to like remember his old friend. Oh, also, I don't think that they're just friends. I think that they were lovers. That's why Grant hasn't remarried in 20 years or hasn't seen his wife in 20 years, but he has the budded headstone in his backyard. I reckon that's the original Grant's grave.
Okay.
And I think that they like ran away to this island to write and talk about math together, like all good homosexual couples do.
Yes.
That's when tragedy struck. I think that probably the new Grant, who was Francis, caused the death of the original Grant. I want to say by him being blown off a cliff or something like that. Like,
okay.
There's a detail that keeps popping up in these stories, and that's the boot print in white.
Yeah.
But the new Grant says that he stays on the island because all of his memories are there. And clearly that means that it's Francis's memories of Grant.
Yeah.
And possibly this is even where he died.
I think this makes sense to me, but you still haven't answered my question.
Which question?
Well, if Grant's death is foreshadowed in this book,
yes,
Francis would have had to have written it in, which would mean that your observation that he doesn't know the stories doesn't make sense. And that is your evidence for suggesting that there are two Grants in the first place.
Because I respect Alex Pavesi so much, I want to say that yes, 100%. There is foreshadowing for the real death. Well, I mean, he can have changed the endings and then he's just saying to Julia like, "Oh, I don't remember." He's like lying.
Okay, so you think he's lying about
Sorry,
Okay.
maybe I didn't clarify that properly. I think that when she says, why do these facts not line up? He goes, oh, crap, those don't line up. It was a joke.
Uh-huh.
Even though it was clearly like him changing the ending because of reasons. Because of the things that remind him too much of Grant, maybe?
Yeah, a bit of clumsiness in that he's not the writer of the two Grants.
Well, that's the thing. I think that he has like edited the text. I don't think that he is the talented writer of the two. That's why there's not just like strange inconsistencies, but there are some points of the plot that like feel off, like in Theaterland when the lady goes, oh, it's not my ring, but actually it is my ring, but actually it's not my ring. Like that feels very, very awkward. And also in the Cursed Village, there is like there's a gay subplot in that text that is taken out. The two doctors seem to be in love, and that's completely forgotten. And suddenly Dr. Lamb is going out with Lauren, which is contrast with his earlier character as he's established in the opening. I think that the changes are all being made to erase evidence of their relationship. Let's say that. That seems like a good point to lean on.
All right, so interesting. To sum up your theory then,
Yes.
two Grants.
There's two Grants. One of them's dead.
One of them is Francis Gardner.
Yes.
Francis Gardner went in and edited their relationship
Out of the books.
into and out of the White murders.
I'm going to say out of. Why do you say into? When did he edit it into?
Well, because he's saying there was foreshadowing of his death.
You know what? I'm just going to say that doesn't exist.
Okay.
Let's just forget about that.
All right.
Because I said probably I don't have any examples of that, any concrete evidence. I'm just going to say it's not in there, and Alex can kill me later.
The biggest problem I have with your theory, Ben,
is
is that Grant in the story was delivered the copy of the story we are reading by Julia. He sent this copy away just after the original Grant had died. Why did he do that? How did the story end up in Julia's Blood Type Publishing's hands?
Oh, when he hasn't actually, he probably doesn't want any attention brought to these things.
Like you mentioned, it might be for money or to like preserve his memory, but like it seems like it was dug up from their archives, not that it was sent to them.
Right, because these are all private books, and that would explain that why these, it's not laziness, it's rushed than it would be, right? I think the only thing that I can kind of lean on here is that, do they say how old Julia is? Probably not, right?
I mean, she is adult, she's working.
She's adult, yes. They do say that Grant / Francis left his wife 20 years ago?
Are you suggesting that Julia is
His daughter?
daughter?
I think that would be the most salient point to lean on.
But how did she end up with a copy if he's like trying to stay away from his family?
Ooh, that is a great question. He might have sent his family a copy.
You're just gonna go with a nice simple explanation?
I'm sure there's a more complicated answer here.
There definitely is a more complicated answer. And
Okay, I'm gonna say that he locked a copy, the only copy of the story, up in a chest, in a message bottle, and sank it to the bottom of the sea. And then Julia came across it, and she said, "My goodness, this sounds just like my estranged father, who I've never met." And she opened up the bottle, and she knew, and so she had to find him.
And final question: Elizabeth White is only the inspiration for all of these murder mysteries?
I think so. I don't.
You think that's all a red herring?
I'm going to say yes. I don't think that anyone actually killed her. I think that would be.
You don't think anyone killed her? You think that Elizabeth White just died?
Why would you write about a murder that you did because everybody gets strangled in that book? Everybody gets strangled in the Cursed Village.
Everybody does get strangled.
I think it's inspiration. I think that it's the equivalent of starting a writing class and you put a topic on the board and you say strangling, and then you go right, and that's what I'm going to go with.
Yeah, it's like you're teaching a student.
Yeah, look at that. It all ties together. It was inspiration.
Exactly.
Makes sense to me.
Anyhow, Herds, I think we're going to have to leave it there. Best of luck for the points for next week.
I guess we'll see how we go. I hope for at least 1 point. That's
this
my
is
dream.
your Murder Mystery World Tour here on 2SER 107.3. We are talking Alex Pavesi's 8 Detectives. We'll be back all the way to the end of the story next week on the show. Look forward to having you join us then.
And we'll see how we go next time.
That we will. This is Death of the Reader. We're out of here.
Bye.